All right, so we've talked through the pragmatic themes of truth as tentative, truth as that which is workable, truth as necessarily subjective, and truth as necessarily relative, and then the corresponding social benefits of having a more tolerant, open-ended live and let live, and hopefully less judgmental approach to a social organization. But there is a problem here, and it's a deep philosophical problem here, and it's one that the idealists and realists are always very quick, and reasonably so, to level against this whole pragmatic approach here. So I want to indicate here the problem in a completely tolerant and non-judgmental way. It's the problem of all of the weirdos and sickos who exist in our society. The problem is this: if we say, for example, that truth is what works and truth is what satisfies desires, what do we say about all of the people whom ordinarily we would designate as weirdos or very sick individuals or outright evil individuals who have all kinds of desires that they want to satisfy and have figured out various ways of working in the world to get those desires satisfied? So what do we say? The objection runs about people who say, well, I'm really sadistic and I'd like to axe murder lots of people, and so I've got a really sharp axe and that seems to work really well. What do we say in a tolerant, non-judgmental, live and let, in this case die for some people, approach, a wishy-washy direction that pragmatism, we might say, seems to be taking us down? What do we say about people who are child molesters and various sorts of sexual weirdos, right, and so forth? And those certainly are extreme cases, but there's lots of things that we can think of that would fit into the category, whatever we are able to call weirdos and sickos. If we follow this, then it doesn't seem like we have any sort of serious moral objections to any of those things. Truth is what works for those guys. What works is what satisfies their desires. Truth is what satisfies their desires. Their desires are subjective, but we have different subjective desires. Truth is subjective, so subjects are variable. So truth is variable. So what's true for those people is just different than what is true for me or what's true for you. But I'm epistemologically modest. I don't want to impose my value framework on you. I have to therefore be tolerant of whatever your different value framework is, right, and so forth. Now this is a problem because a big part of morality seems to militate, right, against the idea that in any way, right, people who are child molesters or axe murderers, right, and so forth, should get a toehold right in the door. Those things are absolutely wrong. Whenever they happen, under any circumstance, there is no excuse. We should be absolutely judgmental and intolerant, right, of people who fall into those kinds of categories. But the problem then is that pragmatism, as derived here, seems to undercut, right, our ability to do so. Now, this is an objection, of course, that pragmatists will take seriously, in part because they recognize it themselves, but also it's one that they have to take seriously because all of their philosophical opponents beat them over the head with it every single time. And it was a problem for pragmatists, particularly in the first generation or so of pragmatism, because built into the first generation or so of pragmatism was a certain assumption that the second generation of pragmatists wanted to change in order, in part, to solve this particular problem of judging people as weirdos and so forth. And it takes us to the issue of social approaches to morality versus individual approaches to reality. And this is a way, again, in which the pragmatists differ significantly from the realists, who are much more individual, right, in their approach, not only to cognition issues, but also to value issues as well. The assumption that the second generation of pragmatists will point out that we have been making when we're doing this derivation is probably that we are assuming an individualist approach here. So we've been assuming that truth is what works for the individual, that what works is what satisfies individual desires. Do you want to go to New York? Do you want to go to Cape Town? Do you want to go to Sydney or wherever? And so forth, right? And so desires are subjective across the individual. So we have individual subjective truth, and truth is variable and relative to the individual. And then that sets us up for the problem of all of the individual weirdos and individual sick people or evil people who are doing all of those horrible sorts of things. What the pragmatists will say is, well, there is no such thing as absolute truth, right? We've dispensed with that. There is no such thing as certainty. we're never going to be in an epistemological position to pronounce morally any sort of absolute condemnation and intolerant judgment on anybody. But we don't have to be if we change the assumption that the operative unit, morally speaking, or the significant value, right, grouping is the individual, to an assumption that that is a social unit. So what we can do is say is that really when we're talking about values and goals and what works, is not the values of the individual or what works for the individual that we're primarily concerned with. What we're primarily concerned with is what works for the group, right? What works for the social unit, however we define the social unit. That is going to be our standard of evaluation.